Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to November's Maritime Market Briefing. Hold on. Yeah. So my name's Ewan Brow. I'm the Managing Director of ABL England, where our casualty business lies. For those who were expecting to see Mark this morning, sorry, but you have me instead. Our briefing this morning is accredited by the Chartered Insurance Institute, and delegates can claim up to 1 CPD hour for your participation. We will therefore keep a record of those who are in the room today and those who are logging in online. If you haven't already done so, please see one of my colleagues outside to register your name to get your CPD accreditation. Just a quick reminder today as well, we'll be ending the webinar portion of the briefing after the technical presentation, and the marine casualty case reports moving forward would only be presented in person in the room. Of course, we are happy to discuss with anyone who would like more information on them post-briefing and to look at how we can facilitate that. I'm delighted today to introduce Jason Bennett, who is the ABL's Director of Salvage Services. Jason will be presenting today on the topic of the current status of the salvage market, recent development and case studies. And that will be followed up by Colin Stevenson, who is a civil engineer and part of our EDP program, who will be presenting the case studies. A reminder, usual caveats apply, Chatham House rules. Please also remember that the information contained in today's presentations and any opinions or comments expressed are those of the presenters and not necessarily those of ABL. We also welcome your feedback. At the end of today's briefing, we please ask you to complete the 3-minute survey online. This is really critical to us and part of our CPD accreditation to provide a way of showing continuous improvement in the presentations we give. Not only should it help us improve our content, but also maintain our CPD accreditation. Also, don't worry if you missed this QR code. It will come up again at the end, or there's some QR codes outside. Also, it being November, it's a good reminder here. So many of our colleagues have seafaring backgrounds. The well-being of seafarers, men and women, is always a topic close to our hearts across ABL Group. The important work they do and sacrifices they make today and historically is forever and always in our minds, which is marked by Remembrance Day on the 11th of November. True to our commitment on this topic, ABL Group is a signatory to the Neptune Declaration to improve working conditions for seafarers across the world, and we would encourage you, if of interest, to look at this as well, whether or not your company can become a signatory. We will also be raising money, as always, in our raffle, our annual marine insurance seasonal drinks on the 28th of this month, for 2 important charities, the Mission for Seafarers and Stella Maris. If you have not received an invitation to the event, please do let us know and we'll be delighted to add you. And please do buy some raffle tickets when you have the opportunity. So the learning objectives from today's briefing, you will gain an understanding of the size and current status of the salvage market, including key industry statistics and its connection to the wider insurance market. You will be able to identify the major salvage contractors and their recent activities. You will gain insights through case studies that illustrate real-world examples aligned with the industry. You will gain an understanding of the new loft default clause and its implications. You'll be able to identify other key developments and areas of concern within the salvage industry. So, without any further ado, I'll hand over to Jason for the first presentation.
Good morning. Good morning to everybody in the room and good morning online. And I've already met several old friends, former colleagues from over the years. So it's a good morning to start with. I've put the starter on to keep within the time limit, so that's okay. And I did the best to keep within the time limit by not writing any notes. So if you feel I'm wondering, then please feel free to say so. So I had a look at the objectives. I'll put my glasses on just so I can actually see the screen here. The objectives, we're going to start by looking at the size and status of the salvage market. The figures I'm talking about, as it says there, are figures from the ISU, the International Salvage Union. I will go back to before that, as well as the opinion being mine, not necessarily those of ABL, the cases which I go into are not also maybe or maybe not involving ABL either. I brought them all in just to give a picture of what's happening. So it's a broader picture than that. The figures are from the International Salvage Union, ISU. Other salvors do exist, as we say, for every list of the BBC in the broadcasting terms, including some of my former colleagues who are involved in a couple of entities providing service around the world. However, the ISU is a good touchstone. It represents about 55 members on a multinational basis and around 38, 40 odd countries around the world. So they give a good picture, and they also make an easy source for the amalgamated information which they provide on an annual basis. So they're the figures you can see behind me. From those, if you look at the figures, you'll see that the stats for 2023, obviously 2024 is ongoing, the gross revenue, and this is the revenue received and declared by the ISU member companies before any deductions, before paying subcontractors, etc., was 398 millions, which is an improvement over the 241 of 2022. They used to say that it was about a 50-50 split between the emergency response dry salvage work and wet salvage, wreck removal. That was certainly the case back in my day, if you like, when I was directly involved in it. It seems to be a trend over the last few years has been a slight shift that you'll see from this figure, that the wreck removal income has increased from 55 to 193 million. And that took the burden of the income on produce most of the income on that basis. Within the emergency response, the dry salvage figures that you're looking at, then the LOF cases were about 15% of the revenue on about 10% by number, and that was 29 millions. And that's from a historic low for ISU members of 16 cases for the entire year, which is very low. Various reasons for that. Things have changed back from the 80s and 90s. You were getting lots and lots of short duration, especially towage-based operations, LOS, regularly. That changed by the nature of the thing. But you can see that is pretty low, considering all factors. I think if you work it out, my maths, it works out about an average 1.8 millions per LOF-based service and about 1.2 millions for non-LOF-based service. Having said that and used the figure, I'll put my caveat, I hate it, especially on the Lloyd's form figures, because an average can be very, very misleading. You can have something where there are very few funds left, low values, lots of expenditure, lots of work, and so the percentage of any award will be significantly high, whereas something with the mega fund with enough money, whatever, and reasonably easy and reasonable short duration, then the percentage will be very, very low. So treat that with a caveat, but just for a tracker year by year, those figures are out there. Within that, and it's not shown, I think the scopic cases, the ones where the P&I club, where the scopic clause incorporated and invoked, and the P&I clubs come in at the end, that is about 9 millions, which is down from the previous year. So scopic contribution was 9 within that figure of the 29 millions for the year. Overall, I think it represents an ongoing trend, a trend for improved safety. You've had regulations for years for ship standards increasing, training increasing, and that is you're reaping the benefits of some of those figures. There is that in there. Within the figures, you're also seeing a trend, and we'll come on later to the LOS section, of whatever the figures are reducing input from the Lloyd's form aspect and more to other contracts. And that has some, in the right place, some benefits, and potentially the wrong place, some disastrous consequences. But I'll stop expanding on it now. I'll come to it later. So it's a good thing overall in that it reflects increased safety. I would say that I think in about 60% or so, if you look at the ISU webpage or Mother, if you do other studies, that the human factor will always be present, irrespective of training. You have fatigue, you have various aspects of that. That comes into over 60% of causal factors towards this. So no matter that will still be there and will be reflected in the ongoing status of the industry. With that funding pays for the industry to respond. There are traditionally now fewer companies doing pure salvage as their pure income. There are fewer providing it on an international basis. We saw with lockdown, the beginning of the demise, we had Ardent and Fallen Fires prior to that, so two became one, Spitzer and Titan. That's ancient history now. And for the past 4 years, that one became zero when that was closed down during the period. So the number of people providing and able to respond and pool of people of dedicated salvage personnel, I think overall has decreased. If you look within companies, it varies a little bit depending on what they're doing and if they're utilizing them for other resources as well. But ones which had previously, let's say, every salvo was a diver and the teams were predominantly pure 100% their own personnel, that brings benefits from knowledge, awareness, reliance, working as a team. That number has decreased. You'll find more and more that mixes of third parties come into it as well. That's always been the case. But from what I'm looking at, it seems to be that most cases now will involve some mix of third-party personnel and your own personnel. And if you drill down later, we'll look at some figures in specializations, marine chemists, rare. If you're looking at firefighters, marine firefighters with experience, then also rare. Some companies have their own or do it as another operation within the company, and some don't rely on others. Some have tried and still rely on others. But even the independent parties just doing that, they are reducing capability in numbers. I'm looking at my time. I'll move on, put my glasses back on, stop and read. If we look at this seems we're in Lloyd's, and I was in Lloyd's recently for Kevin's retirement bash, but the salvage arbitration branch is here, provides an invaluable service. Without it, things would grind to a halt. And this, of course, the market knew this and reflected when the proposed changes came up a while back to Lloyd's looking at the whole thing. And now it's established in its place and actively engaged across the industry in trying to increase awareness and raise awareness and use of Lloyd's in appropriate places, which we'll come on to later. But the activity for this year, now there is some lag. There will always be a lag, and there'll be a slight difference between the ISU figures and Lloyd's salvage arbitration branch figures for various reasons, when things are counted in, whether it's the year of declaration, whether it's a year of income, revenue, and some of the numbers, etc. But overall, the trend can be seen from looking at these as well. So if you look at the website, you'll see a total of 17 cases for the year to date, 2024, of which you're looking at 8 groundings, 4 with fire or explosion, engine breakdown, probably with towage, of 3, water ingress flooding 1, and this falls under the other as far as the website goes, but capsize being 1. So the moment 17, and so for where we are in the year, it looks similar to an indicative, quite a low number, relatively similar to the previous years. No great upturn, potentially a downturn. We will see at the end of the year as well. From what you're picking up for vibes on the street, you talk with people, like everything else, it comes in spurts. There's some quiet moments, some more activity, but there have been notable cases, but generally less activity, I would say, on the salvage front of the big cases. So we'll look at continuing the theme, really. Salvage or not salvage, this does involve both. I thought a theme for the year, you couldn't introduce this topic without introducing the attacks, which you've seen. The cases, you see examples are right, are by no means most of them, no means all of them. I just picked them partly for names, partly for dates, and we'll go from there. All of the notable thing, depends where you look at which website, started with 60, now it's saying about 90 attacks from the start in 2023 in November. You've had 4 persons killed that I can find on the record, 3 in one case and 1 involved in the vessels that sunk. The 2 vessels sunk, the Ruby Mar was sunk, hit by a missile. The Tutor was hit in June 2024, and that was by a drone boat packed with explosives, and that was also one of the casualties, one of the fatalities involved. You also have vessels seized, 1 vessel, and the Galaxy Leader. So not involving direct salvage here, but worthy of mention, I think, particularly with mentioning at the beginning, the seafarers involved, etc. That was seized, it was taken, it had a crew of 25, taken in November 19th, 2023. And from the record, we're not directly involved with this case, but from record I can find out there in the public, then the 25 crew with the vessel were held near Hodeida, and the International Committee of the Red Cross, their representatives attended twice, being in May and September 2024 was the last one I've got a record of. So whilst we're talking about ships, activities, revenues, the heart of this still are the seafarers affected by all of this. You have a few examples. You'll see that it comes in spurts. It was very active for a period. Then it seems to die down a little bit. And then other activity, partly reflected maybe by the ongoing greater picture in the region. Most recently, I think you had two attacks on 2 US warships, one being the Spruance. They were unsuccessful, but I think they were attacked by a combination of missiles and drone boats. So technology is there, and the numbers of missiles seem to be there. I've already mentioned you had drones, you have missiles being used. One not picture, for instance, this I'll put them down in August 2024, but just before that, you had Sunion, which was attacked by missile. Needed firefighting support, and linking in with my other comments about the income, the revenue, the shape of a salvage world. The region historically has been one, the Red Sea around Aden has been one where if you're looking for tug support, it's been fairly limited. It used to be no major asset was stationed there. We'd look for transiting things in particular. And if not, then you send one, you mobilize one. So that's not a new thing. But you're also looking now for firefighting support, and the number of people coming forwards with availability is dwindling, I think. The way I'm reading it, I've no hard figures. I haven't looked at X number of firefighters available in 1990, 2000, 2010, but that seems to be the view. They always were specialized, but trying to get people with the expertise and availability is a hard task. Combine that with trying to get an availability of a suitable tug and one which is willing to respond in those areas is difficult. And then you overlay that was under pressure whilst they were responding for the towage, Sunion I'm talking about, and you require military coverage. So it has to be very thought through, very combined, very active engagement, and preferably some of this is thought about and looked at in company sponsors, the salvos themselves, governments, and everybody needs to, insurers, talk about this, and above prior preparedness will help in the situations. Nothing will be easy for those particular areas. Halfway through, so I'm not going to go in great depth, but to give you a picture, one picture at least, I've pointed you to another picture. For the fire, if you look at the ISU Q3, if you don't have the magazine, it's available on their website. That's got a picture of some of the vessels as well. But for fires, you've had a container vessel, which responded to off of India. That had a large firefighting team were landed on board, and also involved support from the Navy. So again, collaboration between commercial and government forces, and that went on for several weeks duration. Fires on container ships are difficult. Fires on big container ships are very difficult. If you're looking at tug support, you need the best, most powerful tugs to do firefighting, and even there, they can reach the top of the stack and do boundary cooling, but they're not going to go into the body of the fire and attack it that way. Most often, it comes down to people going in hot, sweaty, difficult, dangerous conditions. You've had elision, grounding, and refloat. One of the people in the audience here today to join us, companies involved. You obviously had the Dali, which has been mentioned before and is ongoing. Notable in many ways, both for ultimately what will be the commercial aspects, the size and costs and ramifications of it, but this operation, of course, it was straight away brought under the full control of the US Coast Guard, and you had the military involved, clearing the fallen parts from the vessel involved explosives, which I think were the US Corps of Engineers, I can be corrected later from the floor, or maybe corrected for, yeah, you knew something at last, Jason, you've actually read something, brilliant. But Resolve were brought in to look at the vessel aspect, and that was refloated after 55 days of the incident, refloated and towed away. That case, operationally runs on, and commercially and legally will run for a long time yet. Groundings, we had one capsize which was notable, and grounding and eventually breakup on South Africa. That was carrying bagged fertilizer. It listed, was abandoned. The crew were picked up, grounded, and then in winter conditions, it broke up and has been declared a loss, and wreck removal has been ordered. That is notable. We were not involved. I'm not involved in that one, but I mean, you had contractors involved, both two sets of salvage contractors involved, moving from LOF and then through to commercial and looking at a wreck removal order. So interesting case, ongoing. Groundings, you saw already those were 8 out of the figures for LOF ones, but we've been involved as a company, and I've been involved in 3 recently in the Amazon region. One of longer duration involving lightering operations, involved a international and local salvage companies involved. Other ones involve lesser duration, but providing advice remotely, advice about the local response, about the ship owner self-help, etc. And one of those very recently, in fact, a couple of weekends ago, resulted in refloating. But again, that will continue to feature, no matter how good the navigational aids, how good the people, how good the systems. Things shift, things fail, and grounds will occur. I had another one recently, which is ongoing itself as an operation. The salvage bit came to an end, involved patching, involved repatching, involved lightering, and that involved both international and national salvors working with the ship owners and the authorities to engage and allow that one to happen. And that's an ongoing activity. So that, from my private experience and from stats figured in, grounding seems to be a key area at the current time. One which is not necessarily from the stats, I just thought I'd throw it in because from my time doing salvage with salvos, from a time being on this side, looking at what salvos doing and looking at non-salvage cases, that floating docks are always interesting. I think I'm putting this one up there, just say if you're dealing with floating docks, then it should be taken seriously. It should be considered, hopefully, prior to any incident. There are, and thanks to my colleagues who are covering Romania and Bulgaria area for the picture, there are a few new ones being built, apparently. I didn't know, but apparently in the Romania area, they're looking at building some new ones. But there are also several older ones. We're talking some of them over 100 years old, working, being maintained, using the place, designed, doing exactly the job they're designed to do, and that's fine. But there's several aspects to look at. There are cases, and a few over the recent years and even recent months. The salvage activity response required can be at the work site, normal, so therefore you can, in a port area with lots of support facilities, or occasionally it can be due to them being transported. These things, mentions class, these things, some classification societies have rules, others don't, but they're not the same rules as for your vessels transporting around the world A to B, and generally not designed for long towages. When they're new, they may be taken out somewhere, often by dry tow, by being lifted on a heavy lift vessel. Later in life, perhaps, maybe, I need to go somewhere else. And this can also complicate at the after end of a salvage job, is what do you do with it? If it's damaged beyond repair at the local place and needs taking somewhere, the cost of wet transportation, of tow it, dry transportation may be prohibitive as far as economic terms, and the physical ability to withstand the forces on a wet tow, even without being structurally compromised from any damage, can be reduced. The one pictured eventually sank under tow. You have different rules. You have potentially no classification site involved and it's covered under a different set of rules. You have difficulties in access, difficulty understanding exactly what's going on inside. These things should be segregated to many different levels. That's how it works. You put air into these different controllable ballast. You can raise it great control with the ship on. The ship gets repaired, it goes down under great control. The ship is refloated. Continue story. To do that, you have lots of compartmentalization. If, for whatever reason, damage, external or internal, corrosion, maintenance, those start communicating, then the control goes is the first thing. And B, maybe even the ability to rise goes. That complicates, may lead to an operation and also affect any operation itself, how successful it is. We had one I was involved in where when you got inside it, they had to change the method. Eventually, the dock was raised by a different method from the one planned. And that's where adaptation and having people involved who can do that comes into it. That was more wreck removal, not necessarily subject to case of here. So all the message there was just, it's an interesting area. They can last for many, many, many years, decades. They can work perfectly well, but they're worthy of a look at the overall picture of what they're built, what's regulations, how they're maintained, and what happens when something goes wrong. LOF developments, I've got two aspects to talk about. Bear with me. 2024, LOF 24 was launched. With it, you have the Lloyd's Salvage Arbitration Clause, LSAC 2024. This is notable. Lloyd's form, there are people who love it, people who hate it, and a lot of people in between. It's gone through various times, various iterations, various changes. There is an active move to get more buy-in to it, if you like, acceptance of it. Things have been changed structurally, and this is another example where things are developing with the world and hoping reflect how the world thinks about it and maybe make it more acceptable and more taken up on a regular basis. For, as a contract, irrespective of costs, for a dynamic situation involving immediate assistance required, but the exact problem may or may not be known, the exact problem may change. Even if it's known clearly now, it can change later. Then the Lloyd's form is by far the best contract written for that. It places a big best endeavours requirement on the salvo responder, and they cannot just say, oh no, I don't like it anymore. I've got one tug and 5 people. This needs 3 tugs, 20 people, 50 people. That's not your problem. That's their problem. That's what I've stepped up for. So the right place is the right form. Not always necessary, but sometimes when it is recommended. With this one, look out important notice number 5. They'll probably give you a better example than I'm giving, but the main take out of it is that data is brought into it. Like the rest of the world, like my kids are brought up in the data age, I'm slowly learning how to use my mobile phone. Data is key. ESG data has to be collected and provided within 60 days. So the environmental and social and governance aspects have been brought in to look at the overall picture, not just the pure operational and monetary side of it. The bigger picture comes into it. But zoning back in on the hard facts, the sales values are declared, and this was contentious during my time. I used to sat on the subcommittee, and people were for it, people against it for various reasons. But now you've got to provide settlement data. If you're involved in settlement or part of it, then that has to be provided within 60 days. That should allow everybody, the insurers in particular, the underwriters, everybody, the owners, to get a better picture of what the LOF actually costs, what's involved, and what the figures are. Let's take some of the myths, some of the mystique away from it, put it on the table, it's there. So that comes in with the clauses. The other one is that where security is 10 million, the security demanded by the salvor at the end, before they release the salved goods, the vessel, the cargo, fuel, freight at risk, etc., they will ask for security. The level of that, if it's 10 million or less, then the automatic default position is that this will come into a new system, FTDO, fast track documents only, that replaces the previous fixed cost arbitration procedure, which was there for the similar idea, but never really gained that much traction. They will go to documents only arbitration, where the arbitrator will present the case on documents and will arbitrate on that basis, unless the arbitrator orders otherwise. The key important change is trying to encourage the take up and try and reflect more visibility of the real world nowadays and what people are asking for legitimately, and take away some of the mystique, which maybe also have clouded some of the, brought in some false reasoning. I was treated to a nice briefing here, the default clause. It's draft form that I've seen. This is my take on it. Anything I get wrong, I can shout at later and people can come tell me wrong. But another take up is there's a clause being drafted for use with insurance policies to try. One of the things brought up was ship owners may feel they're not, may or may not be supported in this by their insurer because of understandings, misunderstandings, realities, or otherwise. So you now have a draft version at the moment, I think, default position clause that been brought in, which basically is saying that if the situation is danger requiring immediate salvage services as determined by the owner or the master for the best purposes, then LOF is the default contract. That's there within this clause, within the insurance policy, if it's incorporated. And therefore that will be supported. It requires notification to the insurer as well. So no, oh look, thank you very much, here's a bill. Well, I've never heard of this before. Not very nice. It also says, though, that where the danger is less, then the owners should engage with the insurers and try and determine if another contract is better suited, perhaps from the BIMCOs, wreck hire, maybe even tow hire. It's very, very simple. I've got various caveats on that. Good for towage, exactly what it says in the box. Wreck hire, subcontract, daily services contract, perfectly suitable if the circumstances are right. And you'll see from the stats, probably the majority of cases more so than Lloyd's form. It does also put a limit on that within 48 hours, if agreement cannot be reached, then go back to C version 1. LOF is the default clause, and it allows also for an arbitration separate from the Lloyd's form settlement arbitration, an arbitration by a single arbitrator under this particular clause. So that's out there. So 2 moves to try and engage, make things clearer, more transparent, and open up to the market and engagement. So I hope that's given you a rattle through a picture of the income. Income rallied a bit from the previous year. Previous year, historic low number, or prior to that, 2022. Last year, though, historic low number of LOFs, certainly for ISU members, at 16. Income much more towards wreck removal than in response. Response much more towards commercial contracts than Lloyd's form. But Lloyd's form should be retained for the cases which are dynamic, challenging, need that best endeavours thing. To do that, the new moves have been brought in to try and encourage that, make it more transparent, reduce costs of arbitration, and make it clearer to everybody. Hopefully that works. The number of salvos are out there, seems to have steadied, but the number is probably will be an amalgam of own team and maybe local support team, which always was there, but maybe relying on the local support team to a great extent overall, not in every single case. Right, I've got 2 minutes left on the clock, if anybody has any questions. Oh, I bored you all to death already. Hmm. Hmm. Good question, very topical. I'll just repeat it for the online as well. So the question for those online is, groundings are still seem to be a main source, and I've said there probably will continue to happen for human factors or other factors. And the question is, how much of that is global warming, change of currents, etc. There may be something of that. I think it more possibly on a localized basis. So if you're looking at rivers like the Amazon, for instance, where the tidal effect is limited, but winds and flow of water from the tributaries can have a bigger effect on the local condition. And that, I guess, will be affected by the global warming. So to that extent, that may affect more how a grounding is dealt with, potentially the natural cause of grounding, but it maybe creates shallow or bigger variations than normal. So potentially a little bit. Other things are the Amazon fluctuation levels, shifting sands, shifting muds as well. When I told the detail, but I was told when I was at sea, I went up the Amazon ship, and the pilots there, you're driving on what like a road map, green mostly everywhere, and the position is fine, but the river shifts and the banks shift, and right in the centre can be where some of the shallows are. And I was told you want to be not too near the edge, not too in the middle, and at night time the radar screen is so messed up because you're looking up trees and don't reflect very much. The picture looks totally different. Whereas the pilot who goes on the bridge wing, that if you hear nothing, you can't hear the jungle, you're too far to the middle. If you can hear the jungle, start smelling it, and hear the birds and the animals chattering, you're about right. And if you feel the leaves on your forehead, you're too close. Which work, but what about when you've got an enclosed bridge wing? Difficult story. So I don't know. The point there is, I guess, that things change, local conditions change. Some of those local conditions will be driven by warming. To what extent as a causation, I don't know. And the complication, yes. Anything online? No. Oh. Good question. A lot of stuff to entangle. I probably can't do it. Online, the question was the geopolitical situation, the makeup of especially major international salvos, is that affecting the ability and willingness to respond in certain hot areas, particularly where the Houthis are, for instance? And is there a dialogue between the salvos, their own insurers, as to perhaps encourage further response? A lot of stuff to unpack. Roll back to the 1980s. From what I understand, before my time, Smith, for instance, made a lot of successful jobs and a lot of money from being in the Gulf during the attacks, and they were on ships sometimes hit by a flying missile. From irrespective of whether owned by on the stock listed, owned by a major private individual, the risk balance these days is slightly different. Salvos will trade where others fear to go. They will jump on ships when people are jumping off ships. To do that, they'll provide trained personnel, equipment, and insurance cover as best as they can. But there's still a balance, there's a difference. So we'll never roll back the curtain to some of the practices that went on. Part of it is also the numbers of their own people. If you're going to a hot area like that, you preferably need your own people, your own equipment, as much as possible for, you can rely on them. The numbers, some companies have because they're doing other jobs as well. But overall, the numbers probably are a bit less than they were. And that's part reflects the funding out there. If the funding's not there, if the volume is not out there, you can't afford to keep as big an organization. So how many major jobs they can respond to at any one time is probably less than it was overall as an aggregated basis. And then you've got the fact that for some areas, you always relied on local support as well. And when that local support's not there, because there are no local salvos, then it can be tricky. So if you look at the cases I mentioned before, were mainly towage. So most of the salvos, some do, most don't directly own their own tugs anymore. That's a combination. Some are tug-based. But having that tug in that area is a different question as well. So you need to have a system where you can line up by a network you have or not. And I've got another comment from the audience, which actually, what I was going to say was you probably, as far as insurance varies, there's active engagement, a lot of support from the market with the salvos. I know that from my old days, and there's another sitting here. But ask the salvos to what's going on, and in fact, I've got one in the market here. I'll tell you online in a second. Bear with me. So for those online, we've got one there is on this here from Resolve, who had looked with the market about possibility of sharing risks for putting one of their own tugs there, which they're not keen to do because of the intensity of it, and whether that could be the risk basis could be balanced out. And so far, that's not been come to a mutually agreeable position, and it may not be achievable for perfectly justifiable reasons on both the insurer and the salvos point of view. It'd be very hard to achieve that position where you're covered remember there's insurance, there's lives at risk as well, whether you can find a position to put somebody there when you're non-military. That's what the military do, but they're not going to provide tugs. Engaging with the military forces we're there is essential, and that should be done beforehand. I think the best balance you're seeing at the moment is engagement with the military. Hopefully they've got a standing force there created for this, and working together and collaboratively using them for protection is probably the best balance you're going to get. I don't think you'll get otherwise. Well, I'm being shouted at now, I'm over, so I'm going to wrap up. But thank you very much in the audience, and thank you very much for bearing with us online. And hopefully, recapping, the learning objectives, they're there behind me on the screen. You were told what they were for. I won't ramble through them, but you should have learned basically what it consists of, the status of it, how it's active, what's happening at the moment, and the current activities and the dynamics of this ever-changing, shifting world we're in. Thank you very much.